The courthouse echoed with polished shoes clicking against marble lawyers, executives, power players in tailored suits. Then there was Adrian Cole, kneeling beside a broken witness stand, sawdust still clinging to his worn flannel shirt, a carpenter's pencil tucked behind his ear. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. But when Veronica Sterling's attorney walked out, briefcase snapping shut, footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving the billionaire standing alone before the judge, Adrian did something no one expected. He stood, calloused hands gripping the rail. "Your Honor," his voice cut through the murmurs, "I will defend her." The courtroom froze. A carpenter, defending one of the most powerful women in America, against the city's most ruthless corporate lawyer. What they didn't know, what no one could see beneath the sawdust and worn boots, was that Adrian Cole hadn't always been a carpenter, and the case about to unfold would reveal why a man who once commanded courtrooms now chose to build furniture for a living. This is the story of what happens when justice isn't about who you are but what you're willing to sacrifice. 5 years earlier, Adrian Cole had been a different man. Sharp suits replaced the flannel, leather briefcases instead of tool belts. He had worked at a mid-sized firm in downtown, handling corporate disputes, contract negotiations, the kind of cases that paid well but rarely touched the soul. His wife, Rebecca, had been his anchor, a kindergarten teacher who reminded him why they both chose professions that mattered. She would laugh when he came home stressed about billable hours, kiss his forehead, and say that life was too short to forget what truly counted. Their daughter Iris was only 3 then, a bundle of curls and giggles who called him her superhero. Adrian had believed he could balance it all, the demanding career, the family, the dreams they had built together. But life has a way of shattering illusions when you least expect it. Rebecca died on a Tuesday morning in October. A drunk driver ran a red light while she was driving Iris to preschool. Iris survived with minor injuries and a fear of car rides that would take years to fade. Rebecca did not survive. Adrian remembered standing in the hospital corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a doctor's hand on his shoulder delivering words that felt like they belonged to someone else's nightmare. In the weeks that followed, Adrian tried to return to work, tried to pretend that depositions and motions mattered when his daughter woke up screaming every night. His colleagues were sympathetic, but impatient grief had a statute of limitations in the corporate world. 6 months after the funeral, Adrian walked into his managing partner's office and resigned. No explanation beyond, "I need to be there for my daughter." They didn't understand. He didn't expect them to. Adrian had always been good with his hands. His father had been a carpenter, taught him to respect wood, to see the grain and potential in every plank. During law school, Adrian had built furniture to pay tuition tables, chairs, bookshelves that friends still used years later. After Rebecca's death, he returned to that craft. Not as a hobby, but as salvation. He bought tools, rented a small workshop on the edge of town, and started taking commissions. The work was honest. When you built a chair, it either stood or it didn't, no gray areas, no moral compromises, no late nights chasing partnerships that cost you everything. Iris seemed to heal faster with him around. She would sit in the workshop after school, doing homework on a bench he had made for her, occasionally looking up to watch him sand or measure or fit joints together. She never asked why Daddy didn't wear suits anymore. Maybe she understood, in the way children sometimes do, that this version of her father was the one who could actually be present. The courthouse job had been routine: replace some damaged woodwork in courtroom 7, repair a witness stand that had seen better decades. Adrian had taken it because the pay was decent and the hours flexible. He could drop Iris at school, work for a few hours, and still pick her up before the aftercare program closed. He had been kneeling beside that witness stand, running his hand along the crack in the oak panel, when he heard the commotion. Voices rising, footsteps rapid and angry. The door to the courtroom burst open, and a man in an expensive suit stormed past, phone pressed to his ear, briefcase swinging. Adrian glanced up just in time to see Veronica Sterling standing near the plaintiff's table, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair, looked equally shocked. "Miss Sterling," the judge said slowly, "am I to understand that your legal counsel has just abandoned you 30 minutes before your hearing?" Veronica Sterling was not a woman who showed vulnerability easily. Adrian had seen her face in newspapers, on business magazine covers, always composed, always in control. But standing there in that courtroom, she looked small despite her tailored blazer and sharp heels. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of someone trying very hard not to break. "Yes, Your Honor. It appears my attorney has been incentivized to withdraw from my case." The way she said incentivized made it clear someone had bought him off. The judge frowned, shuffling papers. "This is highly irregular. I'm inclined to postpone the hearing until you can secure new representation." Veronica shook her head. "Your Honor, with respect, my opponent has been trying to delay these proceedings for 8 months. Another postponement gives them exactly what they want, more time to drain my resources and bury evidence. I'll represent myself if necessary." The judge sighed. "Miss Sterling, you're facing Harrington Dynamics' entire legal team led by Harrison Blackwell. Self-representation in a case this complex is professional suicide." Adrian's hands had stopped moving. He was still kneeling, still holding his measuring tape, but his attention was locked on the conversation. Harrison Blackwell. He knew that name. Everyone who had ever practiced corporate law in this city knew that name. Blackwell was a legend, ruthless, brilliant, undefeated in cases that mattered. If Blackwell was representing Harrington Dynamics, then Veronica Sterling was walking into a massacre. Adrian looked at her standing there, shoulders squared despite the tremor in her hands, and something shifted inside him. It wasn't rational, it wasn't smart, but he found himself standing, his voice cutting through the tense silence before he could think better of it. "Your Honor, I can represent Miss Sterling." Every head in the courtroom turned. The judge blinked. Veronica Sterling stared at him as if he had just suggested flying to the moon. Adrian took a breath, walking forward, still in his work clothes, sawdust leaving a faint trail on the polished floor. "My name is Adrian Cole. I'm a licensed attorney in this state. Bar number 73892. I can represent Miss Sterling in this hearing." The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Cole, you're dressed like a carpenter." Adrian nodded. "Because I am a carpenter, Your Honor. But I also graduated from Northeastern Law, passed the bar 5 years ago, and maintained my license. I haven't practiced recently, but my credentials are valid." The judge glanced at her clerk, who quickly typed something into a computer. A moment later, the clerk nodded. "He's listed as active, Your Honor." The judge turned back to Adrian, skepticism clear in her expression. "When you say you haven't practiced recently, how recently are we talking?" Adrian met her gaze steadily. 5 years, Your Honor. But I understand corporate litigation. I know the procedures. And I know that Miss Sterling deserves representation more than she deserves another delay that benefits her opponent." Silence stretched across the courtroom. Then Veronica Sterling spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Your Honor, I accept Mr. Cole as my attorney." The judge looked between them for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well, Mr. Cole. You have 20 minutes to confer with your client before we begin. I suggest you use them wisely." 20 minutes felt like 20 seconds. Adrian and Veronica huddled at the plaintiff's table, and she spread out files with hands that shook just slightly. "I need you to understand what you just walked into," she said, voice low. "Harrington Dynamics is trying to steal my company. 3 years ago, I developed a water purification system, something that could provide clean water to communities that can't afford existing technology. Harrington offered to partner, but they wanted control. I refused. Now they're claiming I stole proprietary technology from a project their engineers worked on a decade ago." Adrian scanned the files quickly, his mind racing to catch up with 5 years of rust. "Did you?" Veronica's eyes flashed. "No. My system uses completely different filtration principles. But Harrington has money, lawyers, and falsified documentation. My attorney was supposed to have evidence proving their claims were fabricated. Instead, he just walked out with everything I needed to win. Adrian found himself looking at her, really looking, and seeing not a billionaire or a businesswoman, but someone fighting for something that mattered. Why is this company so important to you? Veronica's expression softened, just for a moment. Because it's not about profit. My mother died from waterborne illness when I was 12. We were living in a refugee camp after fleeing civil war. Clean water would have saved her. I built Sterling Industries to make sure other children don't lose their mothers the way I lost mine. Adrian felt something click into place. This wasn't about corporate greed or market share. This was personal. This was about legacy and loss and trying to fix a world that had taken too much. He thought of Iris, thought of Rebecca, thought of the reason he had walked away from law in the first place. Maybe this was the reason to walk back in. Okay, he said quietly. Then let's make sure you get to keep fighting. The bailiff called the court to order. Harrison Blackwell entered tall, silver-haired, moving with the confidence of a man who had never lost anything that mattered. He glanced at Adrian, at the sawdust still visible on his sleeves, and smiled. It was not a kind smile. The first hour of the hearing confirmed Adrian's worst fears. He was rusty, stumbling over procedural objections, forgetting to cite precedents that should have been reflexive. Blackwell exploited every hesitation, every uncertainty, painting Veronica as a thief who had stolen Harrington's intellectual property and built an empire on fraud. Adrian could feel the judge's patience wearing thin. Worse, he could see the doubt creeping into Veronica's eyes. During a brief recess, she leaned close. You don't have to do this. I can find another attorney. Adrian shook his head. I made a commitment. I don't break those. She studied his face for a moment. Why did you stop practicing? The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his calloused hands that had built Iris's bed frame, her bookshelf, the small table where they ate dinner every night. Because I had something more important to build, he said quietly. My daughter needed me more than any client ever could. Veronica nodded slowly, something understanding passing across her features. Then why risk coming back now? Adrian met her gaze. Because sometimes the right thing finds you at the wrong time, and you still have to do it. That evening, Adrian sat in his small apartment long after Iris had gone to bed. Law books he hadn't opened in 5 years lay scattered across the dining table. His head ached from trying to absorb statutes and case law that should have been familiar but felt foreign after so long away. The hearing would resume in 2 days. Blackwell had filed a motion to exclude evidence claiming Veronica's documentation was insufficient. If that motion succeeded, the case was over before it really began. Adrian's phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Cole? The voice was elderly, female, warm. My name is Phyllis Grant. I was a court clerk for 32 years before I retired. I live in your building 3 floors down. I heard through the courthouse grapevine about what you did today. Adrian blinked. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Phyllis chuckled. Honey, nothing stays secret in a courthouse. Word travels faster than a judge's gavel. I wanted you to know that what you did standing up for that woman, it reminded me why I loved working in that building. If you need help navigating procedures or finding documents, I know every corner of that courthouse and everyone in it. Come knock on my door. Adrian did knock, the next morning, after dropping Iris at school. Phyllis's apartment was small but immaculate, filled with photos of grandchildren and shelves of legal reference books. She made coffee strong and black and spread out Adrian's files on her kitchen table. For 3 hours, she walked him through procedural strategies, updated him on changes to local court rules, helped him craft arguments that were both legally sound and emotionally resonant. Blackwell is brilliant, Phyllis said, tapping a pen against the table. But he's arrogant. He'll expect you to fight on his terms, pure legal technicality. Don't. You've got something he doesn't. Adrian looked up. What's that? Phyllis smiled. You actually care about your client as a human being, not just a case number. Use that. Make the judge see Veronica Sterling as a person, not a corporation. Adrian worked through the night again, but this time with direction, with purpose. He built his arguments the way he built furniture carefully, measuring twice, ensuring every joint was solid. When Iris woke up at 6 a.m, she found him still at the table, surrounded by papers. She climbed into his lap without a word, small arms around his neck. Are you helping someone, Daddy? Adrian kissed the top of her head. I'm trying to, sweetheart. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes so much like Rebecca's, serious and trusting. You'll do good. You always do good. The second day of the hearing began differently. Adrian stood straighter. His arguments were crisper, his objections properly cited. When Blackwell tried to introduce Harrington's falsified documentation, Adrian challenged it not just on legal grounds, but by forcing Blackwell to establish chain of custody, to verify dates and signatures. Piece by piece, cracks appeared in Harrington's case. The judge noticed. So did Blackwell. During a recess, the silver-haired attorney approached Adrian in the hallway. Impressive improvement, Mr. Cole. Did you take a crash course overnight? Adrian met his gaze evenly. I remembered why I became a lawyer in the first place. Blackwell's smile was sharp. Idealism is charming, but this is corporate law. Your client stole technology. We have documentation proving it. Adrian kept his voice low and steady. You have forgeries, and before this is over, I'm going to prove it. Blackwell's expression darkened. Be careful, Mr. Cole. You're a carpenter playing dress-up. Push too hard and you might find yourself in a malpractice suit that costs you everything. Adrian didn't flinch. I've already lost everything that mattered, Mr. Blackwell. You can't threaten me with something I've already survived. The confrontation lit a fire. Adrian stopped trying to match Blackwell's technical brilliance, and instead leaned into his strengths, asking human questions, forcing witnesses to explain not just what documents said, but how they were created, who had access, why dates didn't align with established timelines. Veronica watched him work with growing respect. During lunch breaks, they talked not about the case, but about life. She told him about growing up in refugee camps, about building her first water filter from scavenged parts at 16, about the moment she realized she could turn grief into purpose. Adrian told her about Rebecca, about the night he decided that being present mattered more than being successful, about learning to measure life in moments with his daughter rather than billable hours. They were different people from different worlds, but grief had shaped them both into something similar, determined to make meaning from loss. You could have been a great corporate attorney, Veronica said one afternoon, watching him review documents. Adrian shook his head. I was a good corporate attorney, but I'm a better father, and maybe that makes me a better lawyer too because I remember what's worth fighting for. The breakthrough came on day 4. Adrian had been studying Harrington's documentation obsessively, looking for patterns. His carpenter's eye, trained to notice grain misalignments and joint irregularities, caught something the legal eye missed. The timestamps on the supposedly decade-old engineering files showed metadata inconsistencies. Files claimed to be created in 2014 had been modified in 2022. Just months before the lawsuit was filed. Someone had backdated forgeries. Adrian brought it to Phyllis, who helped him contact a forensic technology expert. The expert's report was damning. Harrington's proof of prior invention was manufactured. Every single document had been altered recently. Adrian filed an emergency motion with the evidence attached. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the carpenter lawyer taking on Harrington Dynamics. Local news cameras lined the back wall. Blackwell entered, looking confident, but Adrian could see tension in the set of his shoulders. When the judge called the hearing to order, Adrian stood. Your Honor, I have evidence proving that Harrington Dynamics has submitted falsified documentation to this court. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Adrian's life. He presented the forensic report, walked the judge through metadata analysis, showed how timestamps didn't match claimed creation dates. Blackwell objected repeatedly, his voice rising, his usual composure cracking, but the evidence was undeniable. The judge's expression grew colder with each revelation. When Adrian finished, silence filled the courtroom. Then the judge spoke, her voice ice. "Mr. Blackwell, these are serious allegations. Does your client wish to respond?" Blackwell stood, his face pale. "Your Honor, I was not aware of any irregularities in the documentation. If there were errors, they were unintentional." The judge cut him off. "Unintentional? Mr. Blackwell, you've been practicing law for 30 years. You expect me to believe you didn't verify the authenticity of your central evidence?" Blackwell had no answer. The judge turned to Adrian. "Mr. Cole, do you have additional witnesses?" Adrian nodded. "I'd like to call Miss Sterling to testify about the development of her technology." Veronica took the stand, and Adrian guided her through her story not as a billionaire defending a company, but as a daughter who lost her mother and spent her life trying to prevent that loss for others. She described building prototypes in her garage, testing them in communities that had never had clean water, seeing children drink safely for the first time. Her voice broke only once, when she talked about a little girl in Kenya who reminded her of herself at 12. "I named my first successful prototype after my mother," Veronica said quietly, "because she should have lived to see what clean water could become." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Adrian looked at the judge and saw something he hadn't seen before, empathy cutting through judicial neutrality. He looked at the gallery and saw people leaning forward, invested in something that had started as a corporate dispute but had become a story about human dignity and purpose. Even Blackwell seemed affected. His usual predatory focus dimmed. Adrian kept his closing argument short. "Your Honor, this case was never about intellectual property theft. It was about a powerful corporation trying to steal a dream because they couldn't buy it. Miss Sterling built something that saves lives, and Harrington Dynamics couldn't stand that someone else would profit from human decency. They forged evidence. They bought off her attorney. They tried to bury her under procedure and money. But they underestimated one thing: the truth doesn't care about power. And neither do I. Miss Sterling deserves to keep her company, not because she's wealthy, but because what she built matters more than Harrington's bottom line. Justice isn't about who has the most expensive lawyers. It's about who's fighting for the right reasons." He sat down. His hands were shaking. Veronica reached over and squeezed his wrist. A silent "thank you." The judge looked at both sides for a long moment before speaking. "I'll issue my ruling tomorrow at 9 a.m. This hearing is adjourned." Adrian barely slept that night. He kept replaying moments from the hearing, second-guessing arguments, wondering if he had done enough. At 7 in the morning, Iris crawled into bed beside him. "Did you help the lady, Daddy?" Adrian pulled her close. "I don't know yet, sweetie. We find out today." Iris was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mommy would be proud of you." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He hadn't cried in front of his daughter since Rebecca's funeral, but tears slipped free now. "You think so?" Iris nodded against his chest. "Mommy always said you were a superhero. You're just wearing different clothes now." Adrian held her tighter, letting the tears come, letting himself feel the weight of the last 5 years and the last 5 days. When he finally pulled himself together, he made Iris her favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, and they ate in comfortable silence. At 8:30, Phyllis knocked on his door. "I called in a favor," she said, grinning. "Got you a decent suit from my nephew. Can't have you facing the verdict in flannel." The suit fit well enough. Adrian looked at himself in the mirror, half carpenter, half lawyer, fully himself. Iris straightened his tie with serious concentration. "There," she said. "Now you look like Daddy." The courtroom was even more packed than the day before. Adrian spotted Phyllis in the 3rd row, beaming. He saw neighbors from his building, people he had built furniture for. Even Iris's teacher, who must have heard the story somehow. Veronica stood beside him at the plaintiff's table, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "thank you." The judge entered. Everyone rose. When they sat again, the silence was suffocating. The judge looked directly at Adrian and Veronica before speaking. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in this case. I've also reviewed the forensic report submitted by Mr. Cole regarding document authenticity." She paused, and Adrian felt his heart hammering. "I find that Harrington Dynamics knowingly submitted falsified evidence to this court. I find their claims of intellectual property theft to be completely without merit. I find that Miss Sterling developed her water purification technology independently, and that Harrington's lawsuit was brought in bad faith to harass and intimidate." The judge's voice grew harder. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the State Bar for investigation of Mr. Blackwell's conduct. This court will not tolerate evidence fabrication." She looked at Veronica. "Miss Sterling, your company and your technology are yours. Harrington Dynamics' claims are dismissed with prejudice." The gavel came down. For a moment, no one moved. Then the gallery erupted in applause. Veronica turned to Adrian, and he saw tears streaming down her face. She didn't say anything, just pulled him into a fierce hug while cameras flashed and people cheered. When she finally pulled back, her voice was thick with emotion. "You saved everything that matters to me." Adrian shook his head. "You saved it yourself. You were willing to fight alone. I just made sure you didn't have to." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Microphones thrust forward, questions overlapping. Veronica handled it gracefully, explaining her technology, her mission, her gratitude. When they asked about Adrian, she gestured to him with genuine warmth. "Mr. Cole is the finest attorney I've ever worked with, not because of his credentials, but because he understood what this case was really about, protecting something worth protecting." A reporter called out, "Mr. Cole, will you return to practicing law full-time now?" Adrian glanced at Veronica, then at the crowd, then at the courthouse behind him. "No," he said simply. "I'm a carpenter. That's who I am now. But I learned something this week. You don't have to choose just one thing to be. You can build furniture and build cases. You can be a father and a lawyer. You just have to know which one matters most when it counts." Another reporter asked, "What will you do next?" Adrian smiled. "Pick up my daughter from school. Make her dinner. Maybe build her that treehouse I've been promising." The reporters seemed disappointed by the ordinary answer, but Veronica understood. So did Phyllis, watching from the courthouse steps. So did everyone who had ever loved someone more than ambition. 3 days later, Veronica came to Adrian's workshop. She watched him work for a while, sanding a tabletop with steady, practiced movements. Finally, she spoke. "I meant what I said about you being the finest attorney I've worked with." Adrian looked up, smiling. "Thank you. That means a lot." Veronica walked closer. "I'd like to hire you as my company's legal counsel. Part-time. You'd work from home, set your own hours, handle contract reviews and legal strategy. The pay would be substantial." Adrian set down his sandpaper. "Veronica, I appreciate the offer, but—" She held up a hand. "I know you want to be there for Iris. That's why it's part-time. No office hours, no travel unless you choose it. Complete flexibility. You could keep your workshop, keep building, and still use your legal mind when it matters." She paused. "I'm not offering this out of charity. I'm offering it because I need someone who understands that business should serve people, not the other way around. Someone who remembers that every contract and every decision affects real lives." Adrian studied her face, considering. "Why is this so important to you?" Veronica's expression softened. "Because you showed me something I'd forgotten. Success isn't about how much you earn or how powerful you become. It's about staying true to why you started. I started Sterling Industries to save lives. Somewhere along the way, I got lost in board meetings and profit margins. You reminded me what matters." She gestured around the workshop. You walked away from your career to be the father your daughter needed. That's the kind of integrity I want advising my company. Adrian thought about it. About Iris. About Rebecca's memory. About the balance he had finally found. About the fact that justice sometimes needed people who understood what they were fighting for. Part-time, he said finally. And I'm still a carpenter first. If those terms work, then yes. Veronica's smile was radiant. Those terms are perfect. They shook hands, her grip firm, his still rough with sawdust. As she left, she turned back. Adrian, one more thing. I'm establishing a scholarship fund for single parents who want to pursue education but can't afford it. I'm naming it the Rebecca Cole Memorial Fund, if that's okay with you. Adrian's throat tightened. He managed to nod. She would have loved that. Veronica nodded. I know. That's why I'm doing it. After she left, Adrian stood in his workshop for a long time, surrounded by tools and wood and the smell of pine. He thought about the last 5 years, about loss and rebuilding, about discovering that sometimes the life you choose is better than the life you planned. His phone buzzed. A text from the school Iris's class was doing a career day next month. Would he be willing to come talk about being a carpenter? Adrian smiled and typed back, yes, and maybe I'll mention the lawyer thing too. Show them you can be more than one thing. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Adrian spent mornings in his workshop, building furniture that people across the city now requested specifically from the carpenter who beat Harrington Dynamics. Afternoons were for Iris homework help, playground visits, the ordinary magic of present parenting. Evenings, after she went to bed, he would review contracts for Sterling Industries, provide legal advice on partnerships and patents, ensuring that Veronica's mission stayed protected. It was a strange balance, but it worked. Phyllis became a regular visitor, stopping by with coffee and stories from her courthouse years. She had become something like family the grandmother Iris had never known. One Saturday, she brought news. Blackwell's been suspended by the state bar, she said, setting down her coffee mug on a table Adrian had made. 6 months pending investigation. Word is, Harrington Dynamics threw him under the bus to save themselves. Adrian felt a complex mix of emotions. He didn't take pleasure in Blackwell's downfall, but justice had teeth for a reason. What about Harrington? Phyllis grinned, fined heavily. And here's the sweet part. Veronica negotiated a settlement where they fund clean water projects in 3 developing countries. She turned their attack into something good. That was Veronica transforming adversity into purpose. Adrian had learned a lot from watching her refuse to let bitterness poison her victory. Months passed. Spring turned to summer. Adrian built Iris that promised treehouse in their tiny backyard, complete with a pulley system for lifting books and snacks. She spent hours up there, reading and drawing, occasionally calling down questions about physics or history that Adrian answered while working below. One evening, as fireflies began to dot the twilight, Iris climbed down and sat beside him on the workshop steps. Daddy, why did you stop being a lawyer before? Adrian had known this question would come eventually. He chose his words carefully. Because when Mommy died, I realized that being a lawyer meant being away from you a lot, and you needed me more than any job did. Iris was quiet, processing. Then, but you helped that lady in court. Was that being away from me? Adrian pulled her close. That was different. That was a few days for something important. But my regular life, the workshop, picking you up from school, making dinner together, that's the life I chose. That's the life that matters most. Iris leaned against him. I think Mommy would say you made the right choice. Adrian kissed the top of her head, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo. I think she would too. They sat there as darkness fell. Father and daughter, 2 people learning to build a life from the pieces of loss. Above them, the treehouse stood solid proof that even in grief, you could create something beautiful if you were willing to measure carefully and work with patient hands. The following spring, Veronica invited Adrian and Iris to a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sterling Industries had completed its first community water system in Kenya. A village of 2,000 people now had clean water for the first time in generations. The ceremony was broadcast live, and Adrian watched from his workshop while Iris did homework at her special bench. Veronica spoke about technology and infrastructure, but then she paused. None of this would exist without people who believe that business should serve humanity. I want to thank someone who reminded me of that principle when I had forgotten it. The camera panned, and Adrian realized with a jolt that she was holding a photo him and Iris, taken at the courthouse steps months ago. Adrian Cole showed me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about knowing what's worth standing back up for. This water system is dedicated to everyone who fights for what matters, even when the odds are impossible. The broadcast ended. Iris looked up from her homework. "Daddy, why is the lady talking about you?" Adrian smiled. "Because sometimes helping one person helps lots of people. That's the ripple effect." Iris considered this. "Like when you taught me to share at school, and then everyone started sharing?" Adrian laughed. "Exactly like that, sweetie." His phone rang. "Veronica, did you watch?" she asked. "I did. You didn't have to do that." Veronica's voice was warm. "Yes, I did. You taught me that success means nothing if you forget why you started. That village has clean water, because you reminded me what Sterling Industries was supposed to be." They talked for a while longer, about new projects and legal questions, and the ordinary business of trying to do good work in a complicated world. When Adrian hung up, he felt a deep sense of peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out, but the peace of knowing he was living aligned with his values. That summer, Iris turned 9. Adrian threw her a birthday party in the backyard, the treehouse decorated with balloons, a cake he had baked himself, a handful of school friends running around with the barely controlled chaos of childhood. Veronica came, bearing a gift, a wooden box that Adrian immediately recognized as one he had built months ago for her office. Iris opened it to find a collection of photographs, children drinking from water stations across Africa and Asia, each photo labeled with a name and location. "These are some of the kids who have clean water because of what your dad helped protect," Veronica explained. "I thought you might like to know that sometimes grown-up decisions affect children far away." Iris studied each photo carefully, her small face serious. Then she looked up at Adrian. "Daddy, you're a superhero." Adrian knelt beside her. "No, sweetie. I'm just someone who tried to do the right thing. Real heroes are people like these kids' parents, working every day to give their families better lives. I just helped make sure they had the tools to do it." Iris hugged him fiercely. "You're still my superhero." Over her shoulder, Adrian caught Veronica's eye. She was smiling, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. In that moment, Adrian understood something profound. Redemption wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It was about small choices, consistently made, to align your life with your values. It was about knowing when to walk away and when to stand up. It was about understanding that you could be many things without losing sight of what mattered most. As the party wound down and kids were picked up by parents, Phyllis lingered to help clean up. She watched Adrian and Iris work together, packing leftover cake and picking up paper plates. "You've built something good here," she said quietly. Adrian looked at his daughter, at the treehouse, at the workshop visible through the back door, at the life he had constructed from grief and determination. "I think so too." Phyllis squeezed his shoulder. "Rebecca would be proud. You know that, right?" Adrian nodded, surprised to find he believed it. For years, he had carried guilt, wondering if Rebecca would have understood his decision to leave law, wondering if she would have approved of the life he chose. But watching Iris laugh, seeing her confident and loved and secure, he knew the answer. This was what Rebecca had wanted all along. Not success or status, but presence. Not ambition, but attention. Not a career that consumed him, but a life that fulfilled them both. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Iris came over and took his hand. "Daddy, can we watch the stars tonight from the treehouse?" Adrian smiled. "Absolutely." They climbed up together, lying on the platform he had built with his own hands, staring up at the emerging constellations. Iris pointed out the few she knew: the Big Dipper, Orion's Belt. Adrian added others, making up stories about the patterns because he had never been good at astronomy but was excellent at narrative. "Daddy," Iris said after a while, her voice drowsy, "when I grow up, I want to help people like you do." Adrian's throat tightened. "You can do anything you want, sweetheart. Just remember that helping people isn't about being important. It's about being present when someone needs you." Iris yawned. "Like you were there for the lady in the fancy building." Adrian corrected gently. "Like I'm here for you every day. That's the most important helping there is." Years would pass. Iris would grow up knowing that her father had once been a lawyer, who became a carpenter, who sometimes practiced law again, but always was her dad first. She would learn that strength came in many forms, that success was measured in presence rather than profit, that the bravest thing you could do was prioritize what mattered when the world insisted you chase what didn't. Veronica's company would grow, funding clean water projects across 40 countries. The Rebecca Cole Memorial Fund would help hundreds of single parents pursue education while keeping their families intact. Harrison Blackwell would eventually be reinstated to the bar, but he would never practice the same way again. The case had changed him, shown him what happens when winning becomes more important than truth. Phyllis would become a permanent fixture in Adrian and Iris's life, a chosen grandmother who taught Iris to bake and told stories about courthouse justice, and reminded them both that family was who you chose, not just who you were born to. And Adrian would continue building furniture, reviewing contracts, attending Iris's school plays and soccer games and science fairs. He would turn down offers to return to law full-time, to join prestigious firms, to leverage his courthouse victory into something bigger, because he had learned, in the hardest way possible, that bigger wasn't always better. That sometimes the life you built with your hands and your heart was more valuable than any career you could construct with ambition and sacrifice. On quiet evenings, Adrian would sometimes take out the photo from that day at the courthouse, him and Iris on the steps, her looking up at him with absolute trust, him looking at the camera with the expression of a man who had rediscovered his purpose. He would remember standing up in that courtroom, sawdust on his clothes, and saying words that changed everything. "I will defend her." But more than that case, more than that victory, he would remember the choice he made 5 years earlier to be there for his daughter when she needed him most. That was the real victory. Not the case he won, but the life he built. Not the billionaire he saved, but the little girl he raised. Not the lawyer he had been, but the father he became. Justice, he learned, wasn't just something you fought for in courtrooms. It was something you practiced every day in how you treated people, in how you spent your time, in what you chose to value when the world offered 1,000 distractions. It was in the treehouse you built, the homework you helped with, the bedtime stories you told, the promises you kept. It was in showing up, day after ordinary day, and proving through consistent presence that love was an action, not just a feeling. And on the nights when doubt crept in, when Adrian wondered if he had made the right choices, if he had sacrificed too much or achieved too little, he would look at Iris confident, kind, secure in her father's love, and know with absolute certainty that he had built exactly the life that mattered. Not the life he had planned, not the life others expected, but the life that, in the end, turned out to be the perfect blueprint for what it meant to be truly successful. This is the story of what happens when justice isn't about who you are, but what you're willing to sacrifice. And sometimes, the greatest act of justice is choosing to sacrifice the wrong dreams for the right life.